Who won big in Australia's 5G spectrum auctions?
And why does it matter that Apple Watch finally has ECG in Australia?
Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
Hi there. Welcome to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading tech journalists to dive into the big tech stories of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host Adam Turner, a man who is in serious training right now for the Tokyo Olympics, purely so that he can get his COVID vaccination faster. Adam, what's your specialist event going to be?
Like I said a few weeks ago, I've actually started hitting the gym this year, which is a bit freaky for me, but I'm in training for my specialist event, which is the 100-meter dash to the bottle shop at closing time. There's some stiff competition in this country, but I think I could make it to the semis.
Look, tricky though, considering we're talking the Tokyo Olympics. There's a kombini on every corner selling booze.
True.
It's like the 5-meter dash. It's not the 100-meter dash.
That is true.
That's a very quick race.
I might have to, allow for that in my training, I think.
We're also joined in the virtual Vertical Hold studio by ZDNet Australia editor and all-round troublemaker Chris Duckett. Chris, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me again, guys.
So, Chris, what do you reckon your strongest event would be?
The 2020 lock-in wine drinking marathon.
Oh, now there's an event where I think a lot of Australians would have strong
The qualifiers.
I believe in you, Chris.
Qualifiers were a killer.
Yeah. Oh, look, I think an event that takes 9 months to hold, that should keep the ratings going the whole time.
Thrilling TV. Chris joins us this week because it's a big week in telco news, with the government's first mmWave 5G auction having concluded, leaving the feds with a fat stack of cash and the telcos with bandwidth to bicker over. And we'll be examining the winners and losers shortly. But first, a heart-to-heart moment here at Vertical Hold. Okay, so if last week was all about Apple hardware, this week has been all about Apple software. It's delivered critical updates for macOS, interesting updates for iOS, but of most interest for Australians, I think, has been the update that they released for watchOS. This is the operating system that, as the name implies, runs the Apple Watch. Because we're finally, after a very, very, very long wait, getting the ECG, the electrocardiograph function on Apple Watch Series 4 or newer. And we're joined by Alice Clarke from the Age and Sydney Morning Herald, amongst other places, and Biteside, and lots of other places. You can see her work everywhere. To discuss this, Alice, why is this a big deal?
Well, we've been waiting for ECGs to come to Apple Watches in Australia for 3 years.
Nearly 4 now, because it was 2018 when the Series 4 came out, yeah.
And so we've been looking over the fence at those Withings ScanWatch users jealously who've been able to enjoy discovering their atrial fibrillation for a year now. So it's big. We can find out if we are in AFib, which, spoiler, if you're under 65, you're probably not.
Well, hopefully you're not. We'll get into that in a minute. But we are kind of late to market with this. I mean, New Zealand's had it for a while. Obviously, US was launch market. But for those kind of not keeping up, obviously it does heart rate. What's the difference between heart rate and getting an ECG done?
So ECG tells you if you are in a regular sinus rhythm or if you are in atrial fibrillation, which is a specific kind of irregular rhythm, which can be a sign of problems with the ventricles of your heart. I think if I understand it correctly, I am not a doctor. But generally, it's a sign of underlying heart issues.
And Apple has basically, I'm not a doctor, disclaimers written all over this thing, don't they?
So many.
So it's, what is the actual advantage? Because everywhere it says, this will not tell you if you're having a heart attack. It will not tell you this. It will not tell you that. How practical actually is it for your average punter?
Well, if you are under the age of 60 or 65, it's really not a huge benefit for a lot of the younger people using Apple Watches. However, it is a huge benefit for people over 60, 65, because already they've got the fall detection if they're living alone and they have kids who are desperately try to put them in a home for no apparent reason, that can make you feel a bit better. And being able to double check to see if you are not in AFib is another useful thing to have on top of the blood oxygen levels and the low fitness alerts. And it also now gives you alerts if your heart rate is too low, below 50, or too high, above 100, and you're not doing exertion.
I saw there's also irregular rhythm notifications. So does that mean it's regularly watching your heart to let you know if there's some weirdness?
Yeah, it's just checking in every now and then to make sure you have not suddenly gone into AFib, or suddenly have your heart skipping a beat, which could be signs of all kinds of nasty and benign medical conditions. If you are a regular viewer of Grey's Anatomy, you'd be quite familiar with VFib, which is when your heart's going really, really crazy and you need to be shocked back into a regular sinus rhythm. AFib is different to that. AFib is dropping beats rather than having extra beats.
Where's the Apple defibrillator app? I'm assuming it would be bad on the battery life, but can you go and bring yourself back?
Well, you can get that built in if you need it, but you probably want a surgeon doing that.
You have to carry around a car battery to power
Yeah.
No, you just hammer an iPhone into your chest heart. Do not do that.
it. Alex
kidding,
is not
I'm
a doctor.
kidding, I'm
He's a
kidding.
real worm, but he's
But
not
that-
a real doctor.
But that point about giving you that wider picture of your heart health is, I think, important. I mean, when I was much younger, for example, they registered that I had a bit of a heart murmur, and this would presumably pick that up. I apparently don't have that anymore. They don't exactly know why. My body is a mystery of science, but it's having that wider picture, but not. And again, we got to stress this: not as a full-on diagnostic tool. This is not the same as going to a hospital, having all those sticky things put on your chest, and having them get that full picture of your heart health.
Correct. It is not going to be something you do instead of having a doctor regularly check in. And if you do need to have a heart monitor put on you for 24 hours to double check that you're not skipping beats or doing other bad things, this is not going to help you either. What this is just another very useful tool that you can have all the data that's collected. And if you are concerned that it's found something odd, you can take it to your regular doctor or cardiologist and say, hey, this seems a bit weird. Should we look into it further?
Do we know why it took so long to get here? Because Apple notoriously sort of don't say this stuff. It had to go. We know it had to go through the Therapeutic Goods Administration, but even they, I mean, a couple of years ago, people were chasing them, and they were saying, no, Apple just hasn't put it in. Do we even have any base guesswork as to why?
The TGA is very odd, I think would be the way to put it. I did a story earlier this year about face masks and how everywhere from Bonds to random places at the supermarket are saying that their face masks are TGA approved. But to have your class 2 face mask approved, you just need to send in a piece of paper saying it does what I say it does. And then the TGA is like, yeah, probably. But then on some other things, the TGA is very, very intense and just won't even do anything about it. So, yeah, the TGA is an odd duck to deal with, and both more intense and less intense than you would like them to be.
Do we need this in a watch? Like, I get the feeling that they're getting to the point now where they're just adding more features to try and stand out from the crowd. Do you think that the one in the million who's found out, hey, I've got a dodgy ticker, great, that was money well spent. But are we sort of getting into those extra features you don't need here, or is this part of their whole? Because it seemed they started off very much with a fitness bent, and now they're pushing the health angle. So do you think they're going to keep fleshing this out as health being their big selling point?
I'm really hoping they're going to keep fleshing it out and make health their big selling point, because I think things like this are really, really useful, particularly for older people.
Yeah.
And the Apple Watch is my number one recommended tech device for older people. My aunt, who is not very well, she's in her late 70s, she has an Apple Watch, and if she ever falls, her kids will be notified, and she uses it to keep on top of things. And now having Apple Fitness Plus, they now have a special workout program for women over 60, which is amazing. It's done by Molly, who started doing the Jane Fonda workouts in the 70s and 80s. So Apple is having really good chops for older people and older people's health. And yes, they have to sell more tech to young people, but this isn't for us. This is for our parents and our grandparents, and they will benefit hugely from it.
And us in the future, presuming those devices are still running. But
Yeah.
speaking of those devices, you mentioned that I think it's Withings has a scan watch which does this in Australia already.
Mm.
Who else is in this space that people could look at for this kind of functionality?
At the moment in Australia, I'm pretty sure it's just those two. Nobody else has been approved yet, as far as I'm aware.
What about overseas? I would assume there are a few ones that work in the US that'll be pushing to work here.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's Samsung. I think Fitbit might have something.
Yeah.
I want to say Sunto has something as well. Basically, if there is a watch manufacturer you associate vaguely with health, they've probably tried to shove an ECG into their watch, and it doesn't work here yet.
Well, it's almost inevitably one of those stories where there's a commonly built part, and as soon as Apple starts putting it into something, everyone, well, not necessarily as soon as Apple, actually, the others may well have
Mm.
beaten them to it, but as soon as somebody starts putting something into it, it's available to everyone works out how it's done, be that their own R&D or grabbing one, pulling it apart in clean room, reverse engineering it. But obviously, you've got to jump through those regulatory hoops. I noticed one of their weird things with this was that they don't intend the ECG app for use in people under 22 years of age. Now, as you've said,
Hmm.
obviously the case for those people is probably very low.
Yeah.
But are there other reasons behind that? Do we know?
Possibly they just haven't done proper tests on how this would react in people that young. It's like when they didn't recommend the Nintendo 3DS 3D things for children under the age of 7. It turned out to be fine, but they were like, it could damage their eyes. We don't know. We didn't check. We don't really feel like checking. So we just will say it's not for them.
It was a great inbuilt excuse, though, to tell my kids not to put the 3D mode on that thing. So I was 100% behind that particular call.
Oh god, it meant my cousins, the older twins could have their 3DSs, and I had to keep like giving the younger one a 2DS, and he was so sad. I think that might be why he doesn't play games now.
That is a sad note to end on. Now, as we always do at the end of each segment, now is the time, Alice, for you to answer 3 critical questions.
Okay.
Where can people find you on social media? Where can they find your work online? And what is the greatest science fiction TV show of all time?
Oh god. Okay. So you can find me on social media on Twitter at AliceDKC. You can read my work online primarily in The Age, Sydney Morning Herald, and on Byteside. You can also watch the TV show I work on, Have You Been Paying Attention? Mondays, 8:30 p.m. on Channel 10. And greatest sci-fi TV show of all time. Do superhero shows count as sci-fi?
I don't think
Depends
so.
on the show.
Okay,
Depends on the
because
show. As the arbiter of rules here, I'll say it depends on the show.
there are time travel elements in the Legends of Tomorrow, which
I'd
is
allow that.
mostly a
Yeah,
time
yeah.
travel show, and I freaking love that show. I'm actually wearing a Bebo hoodie right now. So that's gonna be like everyone's gonna watch it. But if a sci-fi channel show, you're looking at Winona Earp, and yes, that's what I'm going for. Winona Earp and Legends of Tomorrow. Watch them.
Sound choice.
They're great.
Awesome. Thanks for your time, Alice.
Thanks for having me.
So, Chris, you're our man for all things networking. 5G spectrum's been snapped up. Who got what, and what are they going to do with it?
Okay, so thing to realize is this is the millimeter wave band, and so this is the higher end of the spectrum. This is where your speed
Ooh.
is. So basically, ACMA has, well, on behalf of the government, ACMA has gained just shy of 650 mil for a whole bunch of spectrum. The important thing to note here, though, is that basically Telstra got, you would call it the largest share, easily the largest share. And they've forked over 277 million. Optus got a bit less, and they forked over 226 million. And then behind was TPG on 108 million. And that's all nice, and those are some big numbers. But I'll break it down this way. There were around about 360 lots across the country, and almost every single lot saw Telstra gain 5 lots, Optus gained 4 lots and TPG gained 3 lots. And that should tell you everything you need to know about speeds and networks and why it is that Telstra has the best network in the country.
So, Chris, when you say there's 300 odd lots across the country, a lot of the reporting I've seen on this tends to still focus on the capital cities. There's kind of a vague mention of regional areas. Are they that concentrated, or were these 340 lots and somebody has all the 5G spectrum in Walker?
Wow, that's niche. Thank you for that, Alex. Look, someone probably does, and congratulations to that cow. But basically, the lots were they weren't really so much per population because, like, for instance, there was one lot, to give an example, I need to see this on a map because it's called Melbourne-Bathurst.
Wow,
And
that's a big
similarly,
lot.
there's Sydney-Bathurst, right? And that's just sort of showing you sort of like the tracks of
A
country
long,
these things are
thin lot, perhaps?
or it could
called
be
a
most
Hume.
of Victoria, really. Yeah, but you just sort of had names like that, and there's things in there too, like Upper Perth and Lower Perth. Now, I don't think they drew a line in the middle of Perth. They just have the upper band spectrum and the lower band spectrum. But yeah, you had sort of weird things. So basically, which one was it here? Yeah, that's right. So Optus, for instance, gained 800 megahertz in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, but then gained 600 megahertz for Hobart and Margaret River. They just did. They probably have some other spectrum lying around there or somewhere. TPG had less spectrum pickups in Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth, but then picked up 600 megahertz compared to the 400 megahertz before in Brisbane and everywhere else. And basically, Telstra basically just walked around with a bag and just collected whatever it could get its hands on. Because no doubt they've walked in with the biggest wad as well. So they're just like, we'll have that and that and that. But Optus tried to tell people that they'd picked up the golden gigahertz.
Is that like the golden
Okay.
ticket? That's what I was wondering about. Is that a Willy Wonka thing?
It's a horse race, isn't it?
You know what it is? It's something you put on a release an hour after the first journos have written their stories, and we all just go, if only I had that for the headline,
Yeah.
right?
Optus in
Yeah,
golden
I know,
shower
right?
of spectrum.
Thank you. Like the
Let's
headline
not
just
go
right. No, it's just like it's exactly. It's like golden gigahertz. You complete the rest of this line.
Yeah.
So what is the golden gigahertz? Remembering this is a family-friendly podcast, at least in theory.
Optus says that they've gained the top part of the spectrum. If you just picture the spectrum on a sheet of paper, Optus is at the top. Now, physics says yes, they can run slightly quicker and yada yada yada, but it's all just a bit of spin. Like all this spectrum, it's all pretty well, operates the same way. And we're not talking. It's not as though they've sold the millimeter wave spectrum at one end and they've thrown in a bunch of something else. We're talking about all one thing, right? To give you a comparison to that, today, the Department of Comms and their full long name, which I can't remember, because there's, here we go, Communications, Urban Infrastructure, Cities and the Arts, because that's
a broad remit.
how things work.
Yeah.
Such a broad remit. Anyway, but they're proposing to limit the amount of sub 1 gigahertz spectrum that is available later in the year. And the reason why you want that is because that's the one that does the propagation. That's the one that gets through the walls.
Yeah.
That's the one that lets you do the multi-kilometer tests.
So distance rather than speed.
Exactly. That's the one where you think you're on 5G, you do a speed test and you complain because you're 3 kilometers from the tower, rather than 200 meters where the millimeter wave's going nuts. Now, the thing here is that the ACCC wrote a paper on this, and what they were concerned about was that Optus had very, very low spectrum holdings sub 1 gigahertz. And so basically they've decided that, actually the department decided to allocate Optus and TPG a tiny sliver of spectrum each to make sure they had some, because Telstra has very big holdings in the 700 megahertz band, and this is about the spectrum in the 800, 900 megahertz that's going to go later this year. But that explains a lot to me, because I recently switched onto an Optus virtual operator, and suffice to say, the signal is scared of walls.
Well, yeah, it sort of gets like that. And actually, well, speaking of virtual operators, speaking of smaller operators, there were also little bits gobbled up by oddly named companies. Should we care, and if so, why?
No, not really.
What are they going to do with it?
I mean, they're very localized as well. 5G wireless home broadband typically,
Okay.
but off the top of my head, I can't think of which company it was, whether it was Densair or Pentanet, but they only bought around Perth, so clearly they're doing a local Perth play. The big omission in here is NBN, but NBN's picked up some 5G earlier at the end of last year under the operatus license allocation, and they told me they were fine, so they didn't even bother bidding. But they probably will want to bid for this sub 1 gigahertz stuff when it comes up at the end of the year.
Yeah, I would have thought distance and coverage for their fixed wireless would have
Yeah,
been the thing.
yeah, and so they are thinking about the sub 1 gigahertz not necessarily to put data over, but to put phone calls over. So that people that are on fixed wireless, because if you're on fixed wireless, you still need a copper line. But if you can beam, do a mobile call, because, how new is that? Then you can turn off the requirement to have Telstra exchanges operating in parts of the bush potentially.
And sell all that valuable copper.
Not to mention the land that the
Yes,
exchanges are on.
yes, exactly. I mean, that is one thing Telstra is doing now, right? If it's not nailed down and it hasn't been used in the last
Everything
10
must
years,
go.
everything is being flogged off. Like they're going to sell towers, they're selling whatever they want, So, yes, you've got these multi-spectrum allocations coming on, and one sort of does play into the other. But overall, it just proves what we've always known about these networks, which is Telstra has a lot, and that's why they can charge the prices they do, because they do offer the best coverage. Then you've got Optus behind them, which we've known for 20 years is scared of walls. I was looking at this morning going, this makes perfect sense. And then behind them again, you've got TPG trying to do the best they can on the smallest amount that they can go with.
Well, that's an interesting call because Vodafone, TPG head Enoki Barreta was quoted this week as saying that the spectrum they'd picked up was going to enable them to deliver 5G wireless services as a compelling NBN alternative. How compelling can they be if they've only got the smallest slice of the pie?
Well, if you've got a slice of the pie, you're in the game.
Hmm.
The smaller players, the ones we were talking about before in Perth, they've got really small lots, right? Like they've got maybe one or two. I mean, TPG's running around getting at least 3. So if Densair thinks they can do on 2, then TPG's got more than that. It's just, it's one of those things where, as usual, which service you go with is going to depend on whose towers are near your house. And it wasn't just TPG that said this. Andy Penn said it as well. So, this millimeter wave stuff as aimed right at the telcos targeting NBN, basically, to see which customers they can drag away in the next few years.
What kind of timetables are we hearing from TPG phone?
The TPG phone and Telstra are kind of, they're playing around with this sort of stuff. I mean, in one sense, if you sign up for a 5G phone plan with either of them, well done. You've almost enabled your house to use 5G anyway, just by hotspotting your phone potentially. So, it's just a case of them getting whatever modem they want to get and giving it the bits and bobs that it wants. But probably, I mean, and last year put a few flies in lots of ointments. So, probably more towards the end of this year, I think.
So you mentioned the modems, and obviously for fixed home NBN equivalent kind of stuff, they will have whichever hardware they're going to sell you at that point. Be interesting to see whether or not Telstra does it's our 5G NBN replacement that drops down to 5G when the network doesn't work. But leaving that aside, isn't the elephant in the room here for 5G millimeter wave on mobiles the fact that at last count we have maybe 2, probably only 1 actual millimeter wave device in the country that consumers can buy?
At the moment, yes. But, that's this spectrum's going to come online. This was just buying it, so they don't know what their frequencies are. They got to configure their network and stuff. This is stuff coming down the line. The alternative to what you propose, Alex, is that we have millimeter wave devices in country before the spectrum's allocated, which is, we've been in that similarly ridiculous situation as well. So,
but the devices, this is what annoys me though. The devices exist.
They do exist. Yeah, but whose bands are they using?
Fair call, but that's... I find it frustrating in that you've got definitely Telstra's 5G, I forget the full name of it, but their souped up 5G hotspot device. They said that's millimeter wave when they launched that, and that was like 18 months ago now.
That was a long time ago, yeah.
Google told me that the Pixel 5 was going to be millimeter wave. It wasn't going to be useful at that time, but that it was millimeter wave ready and that it would work in Australia. That remains to be seen. Obviously, I haven't been able to test that locally, but that's it. Meanwhile, Apple did millimeter wave iPhone 12s last year. Last week, they announced iPad Pros with 5G with millimeter wave, but for the US only. We're being skipped over almost as badly as we are for electric cars, aren't we?
Oh, we're not that bad. I don't think we've got a tax on phones yet, have we? But I mean, most of the 5G phones at the moment are sub 6 anyway. Which is you get a nice 5G logo on your phone. It is quicker, but it's not the blazing fast stuff we've done before. Now that this spectrum's allocated, but they all knew that was coming. But now that this is allocated, the wheels are in motion. You will see that phone makers will start enabling the bands in Australia. It's a global thing too. I mean, look, you're not Samsung and Apple and them, they're not going to turn on one band just because Australia's selected it, right? The good part of this is that Australia has aligned itself with international spectrum holdings, which so much better than the 3G and the 2.5G days. Yeah,
the dark ages.
Oh, I bought a cheap phone in the US. Cool.
That's a nice pack weight you've got there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, okay, there's nothing here. Bless the brave people that are going to go out and order some stuff cheaply from the US and try it out here. Good luck to you. More power to you. Hope it works. It should work, but I'm not game enough to try it myself yet.
Well, I have this horrible feeling I will be doing some of this testing later in the year, but I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Well, Ookla, who are the people behind speedtest.net, seems to think Australia is doing something right in terms of 5G. They sent out a press release this week that said Australia now has some of the fastest mobile speeds in the world and a median 5G download speed of 283.56 megabits per second during Q1 this year, which is nearly double the global average. Does that mean anything? Is that worth getting excited about?
Nope.
Would you like
damn lies and statistics?
Would you like to elaborate?
Well, the thing is like if you think about it at the moment, right? Where were all the telcos originally deploying 5G? In the middle of cities. Yeah, where are people not going? George Street. Right? So I too could stand in the middle of George Street and get, raging hot speeds. I'm lucky enough at the moment that I can take a ferry down the Parramatta River back into the city now. I get outrageous speeds on that. But that's probably because there's me and two people in a house in Hunters Hill using the 5G network, right? Like, it's just not, it does not have the same usage that it did.
And I think it's worse than that, though, because they're talking about the median speed. And if you think about the numbers with it, you look somewhere like the US where they have a huge hodgepodge. It's quite messy, really, of millimeter wave and sub-6 all over the place, but also spread all over the place and across a population of, 300 million plus or whatever. You gather all those people up, you gather all those numbers up versus the much smaller number of 5G services. And here you had to be pretty dedicated to get a 5G device. Still lots of 4G only devices on the market. The numbers, I think, are naturally going to be higher here as a result of sitting in the middle of that smaller, more dedicated pack.
Yep, I absolutely agree with all that. It's one of those, like, it really is early days in this. And that's the thing. Like, there's no point, I think, at the moment, sort of jumping up and cheering and stuff because it's a 100-meter race and we've barely left the blocks at this point. There's so much more to be done in this. But Ookla love to do their speed tests, so bless them.
Well, Chris, speaking of 100-meter races, I was reading your piece on this, and Telstra made some kind of sporting metaphor about watching real-time stats on 5G over millimeter. I don't understand sports. The regular listeners know this. What are they on about?
Oh,
Why does it matter? Is this the killer app for 5G that we've been waiting
so
for?
apparently, so the image I had of this dystopia, which I'm about to describe, is from Optus. So
Oh, sorry,
it's not.
Optus.
No. It's not just Telstra. Penn said it. Optus had a picture of it. So, but what this for Australian telcos seem to believe that Australians want to go to live events and then either put on a pair of nerd goggles, which is what we're calling augmented reality goggles, go to the MCG on grand final day, and then cover your eyes. Because apparently being able to see the players with some stats down the side and stuff is a better experience than 100,000 people roaring with every kick and, shouting at the ump for every prior opportunity. It's like Optus added that, we think people will go to live music concerts to want to have an overlay.
Of what?
What?
A backing band?
Does it matter? I mean, this is the thing, like especially in COVID times, you go to the fuss of going to a live event to then put a technical barrier between you and the actual thing you're there to see. Like, if I want AR, if I want stats, I'm going to be doing that on my couch. I'm not going to be there and trying to enjoy a live event and think to myself, this would be a lot more enjoyable if I had a delay on it through my phone.
I would have thought the better way to sell that, having done a few live events, would be simply to say, hey, you'll be able to go to this event and your phone won't drop off the network because there's 100,000 people around you sucking up all the bandwidth.
Yeah, I have to say that recent adventures out to the SCG, the phone network has stood up, but I don't know if that's because of lower crowd capacities or they've finally done the amazing thing of 40,000 people in one spot on their phone at quarter time, and we can still browse the internet.
I've had the experience at the MCG on grand final day of sending someone a text message at halftime and it reached them at three-quarter time. It really is that bad.
Well, I mean, I remember being in the SFS years ago, and you would send it at halftime, and it wouldn't get out until you actually got out of the stadium. So yeah. But I mean, that was 10 years ago. But I mean, it's not. Yeah. The experience isn't that far removed.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Chris for joining us for this week's show.
Nice to be here again, guys.
And Chris, you've been here before. You know sort of what I'm about to ask you. The 3 critical Vertical Hold questions. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And because you've already told us what you think the best sci-fi TV show of all time was, and because I know you're a man who absolutely loves an online argument, what's the most overrated sci-fi TV show of all time?
Wow. So you want me to tell people where to find me so that they can flame me for what I'm about to say?
Curses, he's seen through my plan.
Well, start a ZDNet, track me down there. You need, your Google Foo doesn't have to be too crash hot to actually find me. Geez, most overrated sci-fi ever. Jesus. That's All right, let me think about this one. So insert clock ticking music here.
That's number Wang.
I've absolutely blanked.
What was the worst sci-fi show of all time then?
Oh, I don't know. What I used to see in university at 2 a.m. on SBS. I don't know, whatever that was.
So time tracks then, basically. There's a deep cut for some people.
Yeah, you know what? Yeah, you know what? I don't get it, but let's just say it. So people can come and educate me once they find me online about it.
Well, if you want to educate us about your taste in science fiction or your thoughts on 5G or Apple Watch or ECG or anything else, you can catch us online at verticalhold.au on Twitter, at verticalhold.com.au, or via the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
I can't believe that no one voted for the latter episodes of Red Dwarf. The last few seasons were painfully hideous. You know where to find me, people. As always, You can catch us on Vertical Hold. That's not my line.
That's my line. That's my line, damn it.
As always, thanks everyone for listening. I'm sorry I stole Alex's line, but it's my signature move. Don't forget to tell your friends about us. Leave us a review on your podcasting platform of choice to help us spread the good word in 2021. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.